Good day everyone, I'm Michelle B. Cultura, TCC1A student, reporting about what I've learned in Educ 2 Facilitating Learning. Learning is a complex process involving the development of conceptual understanding. Individual learners must actively construct their own learning constructivism. New learning is based on prior knowledge and active learning is more on lasting than passive learning. So thinking about thinking is important. In metacognition, the level at which learning occurs is important for effective transfer. Bloom's taxonomy. In metacognition, the term metacognition was coined by Jean Flaville, simply put as thinking about thinking or learning how to learn. It refers to higher order thinking, which involves active awareness and control over the cognitive processes engaged in learning. Metacognition has the ability to think about thinking, be consciously aware of oneself as a problem solver, monitor and control one's mental processing, and accurately assess what one understands and does not understand. So on rote learning, it involves verbatim memorization which is easily forgotten, cannot be manipulated or applied to novel situations. For example, memorizing metabolic pathways with no understanding of the chemistry involved. Learning that is tied and related to previous knowledge and integrated with previous learning which is not easily forgotten and can be easily reconstructed. Learning can be manipulated, applied to novel situations, and used in problem-solving tasks. Example, using knowledge of organic chemistry reactions to aid in learning the pathways. Metacognitive knowledge. Knowledge refers to acquired knowledge about cognitive processes, knowledge that can be used to control cognitive processes. Flaville further divides metacognitive knowledge into three categories: the knowledge of person variables, task variables, and strategy variables. So in person variables, this includes how one views himself as a learner and thinker. In task variables, knowledge to task variables includes knowledge about the nature of the task, as well as the type of processing demands that it will place upon the individual. Strategy variables, knowledge of the strategy variables involves awareness of the strategy you are using to learn a topic and evaluating whether this strategy is effective. Meta attention is awareness of specific strategies so that you can keep your attention focused on the topic or task at hand. Meta memory is your awareness of memory strategies that work best for you. So there are differences between novice and expert learners aspect of learning. Novice learners, expert learners, knowledge in different subject areas have limited knowledge in the different subject areas, have deeper knowledge in different subject areas because they look for interrelationships in the things they learn, problem solving satisfied just to scratching the surface. Hurriedly gives a solution to the problem first. Try to understand the problem, look for boundaries, and create a mental picture of the problem, learning or thinking strategies. Employ rigid strategies that may not be appropriate to the task at hand. Design new strategies that would be appropriate to the task at the selectivity or in the processing attempt to process all information they receive. Select important information to process. Able to break down information to manageable chunks, production of output. Do not examine quality of their work, nor stop make revisions, check their errors, and redirect their efforts to maintain quality outputs. So in evaluation, synthesis, analysis, application, comprehension, knowledge, making decisions, and supporting views, it requires understanding of values. Combining information to form a unique product requires creativity and originality. Using information to solve problems, transferring abstract or theoretical ideas to practical situations, identifying connections and relationships and how they apply. Restating in your own words, paraphrasing, summarizing, translating, memorizing, verbatim informations, being able to remember but not necessarily fully understanding the material. Bloom's taxonomy identifying components determining arrangement, logic, and semantics. And cognitive, there are factors of cognitive and metacognitive. And nature of the learning process. The learning of complex subject matter is most effective when it is an intentional process of constructing meaning from information and experience. Goals of learning and process. The successful learner over time and with support and instruction guidance can create meaningful, coherent representation knowledge. Construction of knowledge. The successful learner can link new information with existing knowledge with meaningful ways. Another is strategic thinking. The successful learner can create and use repertoire and of thinking and reasoning strategies of active complex learning goals. Thinking about thinking. Higher ordered strategies for selecting and monitoring mental operations facilitate creative and critical thinking. Next is context of learning. In context of learning, learning is influenced by environmental factors including culture, technology, and instructional practices. In motivational and affective factors, in motivational and emotional influence on learning, what and how much is learned is influenced by the learner's motivation. Motivation to learn, in turn, is influenced by individuals' emotional states, beliefs, interests, and goals and habits of thinking. The intrinsic motivation to learn, the learner's creativity is higher order thinking and natural curiosity all contribute to motivation to learn. Intrinsic motivation is stimulated by tasks of optimal novelty and difficulty relevant to personal interest and providing for personal choice and control. Effects of motivation on effort. Acquisition of complex knowledge and skills requires extended learner effort and guided practice. Without learner's motivation to learn, the willingness to exert this effort is unlikely without coercion. So, and developmental and social factors. Developmental influences on learning. As individuals develop, there are different opportunities and constraints for learning. Learning is most effective when differential development within the cross physical, intellectual, emotional, and social domains is take. So, in social influences on learning, learning is influenced by social interactions, interpersonal relations, and communications with others. So, in individual differences factors, individual differences in learning, learners have different strategies, approaches, and capabilities for learning that are a function of prior experience and heredity. Learning and diversity learning is most effective when differences in learners' linguistic, cultural, and social backgrounds are taken in account. Standards and assessment. Setting appropriately high challenging standards and assessing the learner as well as learning progress including diagnostic process and outcome assessment are integral parts of the learning process. So there are basic cognitive concepts, the schema. Piaget used the term schema to refer the cognitive structures by which individuals intellectually adapt to and organize their environment. Assimilation, this is the process of fitting a new experience into an existing or previously created cognitive structure or schema. So, accommodation is the process of creating a new schema. If the same child now sees another animal that looks a little bit like a dog but somehow different, and in equilibration, Piaget believed that the people have the natural need to understand how the world works and to find order, structure, and predictably in their life. Equilibration is achieving proper balance between assimilation and accommodation. So let's proceed to Piaget's stages of cognitive development. In stage 1, sensory motor stage. The stage corresponds from birth to infancy. This is the stage when a child who is initially reflexive in grasp, sucking, and reaching becomes more organized in his movement and activity. Permanence. This is the ability of the child to know that an object exists even when out of sight. And stage 2, pre-operational stage. The pre-operational stage covers from about 2 to 7 years old, roughly corresponding to the preschool years. Symbolic function, this is the ability to represent objects and events. A symbol is a thing that represents something else. A drawing, a written word, or a spoken word comes to be understood as representing a real object like a real MRT train. In egocentrism, this is the tendency of a child to only see in his point of view and to assume that everyone also has the same point of view. Centration, this refers to the tendency of the child to only focus on one aspect of thing, event, and exclude other aspects. Next is reversibility. Pre-operational children still has the inability to reverse their thinking. Next, the animism. This is the tendency of children to attribute human-like traits of characteristics to inanimate objects. Next is transductive reasoning. This refers to the pre-operational child's type of reasoning that is neither inductive nor deductive. Next is stage 3, concrete operational stage. This stage is characterized by the ability of a child to think logically but only in terms of concrete objects. This covers approximately the ages between 8 to 11 years of the elementary school years. The concrete operational stage is marked by the following: decentering. This refers to the ability of the child to perceive the different features of the objects and situations. Reversibility. During the stage of concrete operations, the child can now follow that certain operations can be done in reverse. Conservation. This is the ability to know that certain properties of objects like number, mass, volume, or area do not change even if there is a change of appearance. Next is seriation. This refers to the ability to order or arrange things in series based on the one dimension such as weight, volume, or size. Next, stage 4, formal operational stage. In the final stage of formal operations covering ages between 12 and 15 years, thinking becomes more logical. They can now solve abstract problems and can hypothesize. Hypothetical reasoning, this is the ability to come up with different hypotheses about problem and gather and weigh data in order to make a final decision or judgment. Next is analogical reasoning. This is the ability to perceive the relationship in one instance and then use the relationship to narrow down possible answers in other similar situation or problem. Next is deductive reasoning. This is the ability to think logically by applying a general rule in particular instance of situation. Another theory is Colbert's theory of moral development. The level stage description, pre-conventional level. Moral reasoning is based on consequence or result of the act, not on the whether the act itself it is good or bad. Punishment or obedience. One is to motivate by fear of punishment. He will act in order to avoid punishment. Number 2, mutual benefit. One is motivated to act by the benefit that one may obtain later. Scratchback or Scott's conventional moral reasoning in base of the conventions or norms of society. This may include approval of others, law and order, social approval. So let's proceed to learning and thinking styles. The visual learners. In visual learners, these learners must see their teacher's action and facial expression to fully understand the content of the lesson. Next is visual iconic. Those who prefer this form or input are more interested in visual imagery such as film, graphic displays, or picture in order to solidify learning. And visual symbolic, those who prefer this form or input to feel comfortable with abstract symbolism such as mathematical and formulae or in written word. Next is auditory learners. They learn best through verbal lectures, discussions, talking things through, and listening to what others have to say. Another is tactile kinesthetic learners. Tactile kinesthetic persons benefit much from a hands-on approach, actively exploring the physical world around them. In global analytic continuum, analytic thinkers tend towards the linear, step-by-step processes of learning. Next, the categories of exceptionalities, specific cognitive or academic difficulties. So, learning disabilities is the learning disabilities involve different difficulties in specific cognitive process like perception, language, memory, or metacognition that are not due or other disabilities like mental retardation, emotional or behavioral disorders, or sensory impairments. Another is the attention deficit by hyperactivity disorder ADHD is manifested in other or both of those difficulty in focusing and maintaining attention and recurrent hyperactive and impulsive behavior. Another disorder is the speech and communication disorders. There is difficulty in spoken language including voice disorders, inability to produce the sounds correctly, stuttering, difficulty in spoken language comprehension that significantly hamper classroom performance. And next is emotional conduct disorder. This involves the presence of emotional states like depression and aggression over a considerable amount of time that they notably disturb learning and performance in school. Another is autism. Autism is a condition manifested by different levels of impaired social interaction and communication, repetitive behaviors, and limited interest. Individuals with autism usually have an intense need for routine and predictable environment. Next is mental retardation. Mental retardation refers to significant sub-average intelligence and deficits in adaptive behavior. This is difficulty in managing activities of daily living and conducting themselves appropriately in social situations. Next is physical and health impairments. This involves physical or medical conditions, usually long-term, including one or more these. Limited energy and strength, reduced mental alertness, and little muscle control. Another disorder is severe and multiple disabilities. This refers to the presence of two or more different types of disability at times at a profound level. The combination of disabilities makes it necessary to make specific adaptations and have more specialized education programs. Next is visual impairment. In visual impairments, these are conditions when there is malfunction of the eyes or optic nerves that prevent normal visions even with corrective lenses. Another is hearing impairments. This involves malfunctions of the ear or auditory nerves that hinder perception of sounds within the frequency range of normal speech. Next is giftedness. This involves significantly high level of cognitive development. Another is spiral curriculum. Bronner stressed that teaching should always lead to boosting cognitive development. Studies will not understand that concept if teachers plan to teach It usually only the teacher's level of understanding. In spiral curriculum, teachers must visit the curriculum by teaching the same content in different ways depending on students' development levels. So, let's proceed to the principles of instruction stated by Bronner. Instruction must be concerned with the experiences and context that make the student willing and able to learn readiness. Instruction must be structured so that it can be easily grasped by the student, the spiral organization. Instruction should be designed to facilitate intrapolation and or fill the gaps going beyond the information given. There are 4 aspects and the principles of Bronner. The one is the predisposition to learn. He introduced the ideas of readiness for learning. Next is structure of knowledge. The ways in which a body of knowledge can be structured so that it can most readily grasped by the learner. Then effective sequencing. No one sequencing will be fit every learner, but in general, the lesson can be presented in increasing difficulties. Next is reinforcement. Rewards and punishment should be selected and paced appropriately. Another theory is focused on Bell's theory. The most important factor influencing learning is the quantity, clarity, and organization of the learner's present knowledge. The meaningful of learning takes place when an idea to be learned is related in some sensible way to ideas that the learner already expressed. So there are types of advanced organizers: the expository, narrative, scheming, and organizer. So there are theories of learning: the behaviorism, cognitism, social learning theory, social constructivism, multiple intelligence, and brain-based learning. In behaviorism, confined to observable and measurable behavior, such as classical conditioning in Pavlov, operant conditioning, Skinner, law of learning in Thorndike, and little Albert's fear of a white rat and Watson. So Ivan Pavlov is a Russian physiologist, is well known as to his work in classical conditioning or stimulus substation. Pavlov also had the following findings: stimulus generalization. Once the dog has learned to salivate at the sounds of the bill, it will salivate at other similar sounds. Then the extinction. If you stop pairing the bill with the food, salivation will eventually cease in response to the bill. Then spontaneous recovery. Extinguished responses can be recovered after an elapsed time, but will soon extinguish again if dogs not presented with food. Then, discrimination. The dog could learn to discriminate between similar bills, stimuli, and discern which bill would result in the presentation of food and which would not. So in behaviorism, learning is defined by the outward expression of new behaviors. It focuses solely on observable behaviors. A biological basis for learning. Learning is complex, independent, and classical and operant conditioning, reflexes, Pavlov's dogs, feedback, reinforcement, Skinner's pigeon box. So in behaviorism in the classroom, rewards and punishments. It is responsibility for students' learning rest squarely with the teacher. Lecture-based, highly structured, positive and negative reinforcement, positive and negative punishment. Next is Edward L. Thorndike, trial and error learning connectivism. Learning occurs through stimulus-response association derived from the trial and error. Example, cats in a puzzle box with food outside, length of time to escape. Though there are principles of connectivism. First, the law of readiness states that when a person is prepared to respond or act, giving the response is satisfying and being prevented from the dog so is annoying. Next is the law of exercise states that constant repetition of a response strengthens its connection with the stimulus and this use of response weakens it. Knowledge of results and must occur before the behavior can be reinforced. The law of effect states that learning is strengthened at result satisfaction but is weakened, and it leads to annoyance behavior which results in success or reward in more likely to be repeated than to behavior which does not. Another one is Johnson Watson, the first American psychologist to work in Pavlov's ideas. Experiment on Albert Watson applied classical conditioning in his experiment concerning Albert, a young child with a white rat. In the beginning, Albert was not afraid of the rat, but Watson made a sudden loud noise each time Albert touched the rat. Cognitism grows in response of behaviorism. Knowledge is stored cognitively as symbols. Learning is the process of connecting symbols in the meaningful and memorable ways. Studies focus on mental processes that facilitate symbol connection. So, characteristics of constructivism, learners' constructivism and understanding, as discussed earlier, constructivists do not view learners as just empty vessels waiting for a filled up. New learning depends on current understanding. Background information is very important. Learning is facilitated by social interaction. Constructivists believe in creating a community of learners within classrooms. So, meaningful learning occurs within authentic learning tasks. An authentic task is one that involves a learning activity that involves constructing knowledge and understanding that is so akin to the knowledge and understanding needed by applied in the real world. Applying constructivism in facilitating learning aims to make learners understand a few key ideas in the depth manner rather than taking up so many topics superficially. Give varied examples. So, motivation, the final necessary ingredients for modeling to occur motivation. So, brain-based learning grew out the neuroscience constructivism. There are 12 governing principles. The brain is parallel processor, focused attention and peripheral perception, whole body learning, conscious and unconscious processes, a search for meaning, several types of memory, patterning, embedded learning sticks, emotions are critical, challenge and threat, processing of parts and wholes. Every brain is unique. So other learning theories of note. David Osbel, assimilation, subsumption of meaningful verbal learning. Meaningful learning occurs as a result of interaction between new information which an individual acquires the relevant cognitive structures by already possesses cognitive structures. So there are types of motivation: the extrinsic, tangible rewards, example, salary, benefits, social security, contracts, large outside of managers direct control. Intrinsic is an psychological reward, example, being appreciated, influenced by managers' behavioral and actions. You don't motivate individuals, you create the environment and enable self-motivation. That is management prime role. There are motivational factors in learning. Motivation is a central determinant of learning, and therefore teachers must be mastered or masters in various motivational strategies. So that's all for facilitating and learning.